Welcome back. It is never a dull moment in Washington, and this week wasn't any different. The headlines from the past week include President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner testifying before the Senate, Trump stating that transgender people would not be allowed to serve in the military, and that vote on health care. Plus, now a staff shakeup. Here to help us dissect all of that and more are Mark Weston, who is a presidential historian and author of The Runner-Up Presidency, Cheryl Wilson, a chairwoman of the Manatee County Democratic Party, and Christine Hughes, a member of the Republican Party of Sarasota County. So thanks for joining us on this very crazy week, which just got even more interesting as we were about to head into the 5 o'clock newscast. We found out that Reince Priebus is no longer the chief of staff, and now we have a new chief of staff, and I just want to get everyone's reaction to that first before we delve into some of the other issues. We'll start with Mark. What do you think about this?
General Kelly is a good, very competent man. What concerns me, though, is we now have a General Mattis as Secretary of Defense, General McMaster as National Security Advisor when the Secretary of State Tillerson is quite weak, and now we have General Kelly as the Chief of Staff. This is a military-dominated government, which is bad for the military. Trump, as we all know, is not a man who backs off when things get harsh. So if we go to war, most of the time, if the country goes to war, it's seen as something that the military is dragged into. If Trump should take us into a war, it will be seen as something that the military got us into because there's at such high levels of this government. This is not good for the military.
But is that the first thing that you think people are really thinking about right now? Are they worrying more about maybe the current domestic agenda and thinking, is this a good or a bad thing? Not really going forward to possible war.
Well, General Kelly worked as an aide on Capitol Hill when he was a junior officer, and he now has 6 months' experience as a cabinet secretary. So I think he'll do a reasonable job as chief of staff. He probably knows how to run an operation fairly tightly. We'll have to see who the new Department of Homeland Security secretary is. I think there's a lot of problems with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Authority. They're deporting huge numbers of relatively innocent people, and the new secretary could be worse in this respect.
And Cheryl, your thoughts on this switch up?
I have to acknowledge that war was not my first thought. The political side of it is absolutely what I thought about when it happened. And I just thought, we have a government in chaos. It may be a good development if the president will have a conversation with his chief of staff occasionally. We're seeing that right now we have a president who doesn't talk to his attorney general. He doesn't talk to his secretary of defense or the generals before he makes it or tweets a policy change in the military. And it's been obvious that there has been a strained relationship between the president and his chief of staff and the other White House staff. So possibly this is a good development. It was also an inevitable development after what happened this week with the new communications director. So while it was a bolt at 5 o'clock, it's certainly not an overall surprise.
Right. We'll get more into that about Anthony Scaramucci. But Christine, before we get to that, which is something, all right, Christine, I want to hear what you think about Reince being out.
I think that the appointment of General Kelly is an excellent one because military men are very disciplined. General Kelly is known to be a man of few words but gets things done. I think he has quiet leadership. I believe there won't be any, I shouldn't say any, there will be, I think, much less reduced drama in the White House with someone of General Kelly's stature. If we look back on the appointment of Reince Priebus, let's remember that the one person that Trump really communicated with during the primary was Reince Priebus. They developed a relationship, was a comfortable relationship, so it really wasn't surprising that he put Priebus in. But Reince had not really, had anything to do with legislative development. He ran the RNC. He was really in charge of infrastructure. So I think he was probably okay in the beginning, but I think this is an excellent move by the president.
Okay, well, we'll get to more. We will have more with our guests tonight, but we are going to check on our forecast when we come back from break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're discussing another wild week in Washington. Joining me tonight, Mark Weston, who is a presidential historian and author of The Runner-Up Presidency, Cheryl Wilson, chairwoman of the Manatee County Democratic Party, and Christine Hughes, a member of the Republican Party of Sarasota County. And Christine, I want to start with you, and we're going to talk, all of us, have some reaction to the Scaramucci discussion that he had with a reporter. I guess he says he was under the impression it was off the record. The reporter says it was absolutely not off the record. And he launched an attack on Reince Priebus. We see how that turned out. Yes. He used some what many people would call inappropriate language. Your response to someone who is the communications director of the White House speaking like this to a reporter? Well, I can't excuse, I guess it was characterized as colorful language that he used. He obviously is very defensive and protective of President Trump. And I think that's what came through these comments that he made, which really weren't appropriate for someone who's the communications director for the White House. So I can't defend the language, but I understand the frustration that he has in terms of these leaks that have been continuously occurring from the White House. I mean, from that point of view, I think he was correct in raising it, but he could have characterized it in a much different way. And Cheryl, your thoughts?
Well, I come from both analyses. If he did not know that he was on the record, I wonder why he's in the position that he's in. I tend to fall, though, on the other side, that it was very much knowing that he was on the record and that it was a way to create a diversion. You mentioned at the beginning of our segment this evening that Jared Kushner was testifying before Congress on Monday of this week. How many stories have there been since that testimony? So when you begin to talk about Russia, or when you begin to talk about the president's taxes, they begin to get very uncomfortable. So an outrage or a hubbub, it has probably been very useful to them. I will say that I'm the chair of a local county Democratic Party, and I know when I'm on the record and when I'm not off the record. So I really don't buy that too much.
Okay, and Mark, what do you think? Do you think that this was actually a tactic that maybe President Trump appreciates? There's a lot of people saying that he was happy with Scaramucci going after leakers because he is just as angry about the leakers as Scaramucci is.
Scaramucci is the son of a Long Island construction worker, and Trump has dealt with construction workers all his life. So I think they have an affinity. There will always be leaks, though. I don't think you can have an administration that has no leaks whatsoever. Leaks happen when people are unhappy with the policy and they can't go through the normal channels to change it, and so they leak. And if you're going to get this upset over leaks, you're going to have a long and frustrating 4 years.
And it really doesn't matter how upset you were. The language was inappropriate, especially coming from the communications director. I've heard several analyses on TV and radio just in the last few days, and people who have worked in previous administrations quickly say you would be shown the door. Quickly. George W. Bush would not have tolerated it. Ronald Reagan, can you imagine what his reaction would have been? So it's very inappropriate, and I do get that he's the son of a construction worker, but he's also a Wall Street executive. He's, I think, the fourth or fifth guy from Goldman Sachs that's joined this administration. So he and the president both know proper protocol, and when you use the language, if you do, and then when you kind of watch your manner.
Yeah, I had the same thought that maybe in other administrations, the person being fired or resigning today would have been Scaramucci, not Reince Priebus. But it just shows how different this White House is, that after this comes out, the person who was let go or resigned, he was the target of that attack, and he was the one let go, not the person making the attack. So very interesting there. So let's move on to health care, and I want to ask Christine why you think 3 Republicans were holdouts when this is what has been the hallmark of all of their campaigns, their rally cry, but they couldn't get it done.
Well, I think that if I could just make a comment overall, that the failure of this whole health care legislation demonstrates the fact that one party cannot do health care. So you had Democrats by themselves without one Republican vote put in Obamacare. Yes, I will grant that they did allow Republicans to add amendments. Not one was ever included in Obamacare. And then the infamous Pelosi. We have to pass it to know what's in it. Now we fast forward and we have the Republicans. The big issue, I think, in a big tent party like the Republican Party is that you have not only free market people, but you have people that are very concerned about the poor, and rightly so, and that's the issue of Medicaid. And in that, these senators really were not happy with the proposal for block grants for Medicaid, which wouldn't go into effect until 2021. But that was really the crux of why they couldn't support this particular bill. Ironically, block grants for Medicaid were absolutely touted by Democrats during the Clinton administration. So it's very frustrating now to see why, you know, they just, I don't know what it was, for principal reasons, when it really seemed like a sound solution, that they could not come together on this legislation.
And Mark, do you see a possibility of this happening anytime in the near future? Will it be resurrected? Will there be some type of bipartisan get-together on this?
I think it is possible, because I think the idea of repealing Obamacare is, if not dead, very close to being dead. This vote was theater. There are many more than 3 senators, Republican senators, who are against this bill, but they are afraid of a primary challenge from the right. So people like Shelley Caputo of West Virginia, John Portman of Ohio, were very happy to have 3 and no more than 3 people kill the bill. The 3 people who are least afraid of the Tea Party: John McCain, who has brain cancer, is not going to be running again; Lisa Murkowski, who beat the Tea Party candidate in Alaska; and Susan Collins from liberal Maine, which doesn't have much of a Tea Party. So it's no coincidence. These are the 3 people who were chosen by McConnell and the other Republicans to take the heat and kill this repeal that none of the, very few, certainly nowhere near a majority of the Republicans wanted.
And Cheryl, we're going to move along to another topic that we discussed earlier this week, the tweets from President Trump about transgender people serving in the military. It's not an enacted policy, it was just a tweet, but I want to get your response to the fervor that has happened after this was put out there.
My first reaction was regarding the tweet. I was glad to see that the generals said tweet is not policy. Tweeting does not generate a change in our policy. My second thought was, as I mentioned earlier, it appears that it caught the generals by surprise, and the Secretary of Defense is taking a break. He's been in the job 6 months, but he needed a break. So again, it reflects to me a government in chaos, a government that is switching the topic. Again, it was out of the blue. It was out of nowhere in a very difficult week. So it gave some diversion. But the real painful part is the affront to, we don't really even know how many transgendered service people. I've heard estimates from 3,500 to 15,000, and that's kind of the point. They don't know that an individual is a transgendered service person and someone who is willing to serve the country in the armed forces, put their life at risk as necessary, doesn't need to be pointed out and kicked out of the military because of biases of this president or because of a desire from this president to play to biases of people that he's counting on for re-election. I found it painful in many fronts.
And Christine, we just have less than 30 seconds. Your response to that?
Well, first of all, I think General Mattis is on vacation, and I think he's a tremendous leader. They are studying this whole issue of transgenders in the military. This is not a surprise. This has been going on for 6 months. And the issue really is, does the military pay for the transitioning of a transgender? That's really the issue. It's unfortunate that Trump put a tweet out and then the generals are caught, because the final decision should be made, the recommendation needs to be made to General Mattis, and then policy implemented by it. But this whole transgender issue isn't coming as a surprise, because it's being addressed and worked on in trying to make a recommendation.
Well, coming up next, our final thoughts from our guests. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're discussing the wild week in Washington. Our guests are joining us with their final thoughts on what the outcome may be from all the events that took place over the last few days. We'll start with Christine on your final thoughts about this week. Lot to digest.
Lots to digest, and yes, it has been a pretty wild week. But I think we should look at the last 6 months of the Trump presidency. The economy grew 2.6%. The stock market seems to be shrugging all of this off. It is just continues to rally. More companies are investing in the United States. And the general feeling from an economic standpoint is very positive. These onerous regulations from the Obama administration have been are being eliminated or being retweaked. So, yes, we clearly have to keep up on our toes with what's happening, but I think overall the direction of the country right now is on a good course.
So maybe this is a reset button with everything that has happened. We will see.
We will see.
Okay, Cheryl, your final thoughts.
Well, I think we had been hoping for a while that we would see a reset button with the president. We held out hope the first few months that perhaps he would change and adapt to being president rather than being a candidate or a reality television star. And we had to come to that conclusion a few months ago that that wasn't going to happen. But the realization that I'm coming to now is that he is changing the presidency. The presidency is, he's changing not only the presidency, but several of our institutions, our foundations, our positioning, our standing in the world. And I think that is probably the overriding concern that many of us have. I can't help but compare the conditions of when Donald Trump became president to what Barack Obama faced and the progress that he had made in the first 6 months. He had accomplished a lot. He had begun the process of getting out of a very severe recession, and he was not using the excuse that he was getting into the job or that didn't he win a wonderful victory in 2012. So my concern is more what's happening to our institutions and our foundations.
Okay, well, we are out of time, Mark. I am sorry.
You talked too much.
Next time you're on, you will get the but I know you said you thought you had shared most of your thoughts anyway, so I'm not particularly picking on you. But if you enjoyed tonight's discussion, you can watch our past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku, including this discussion as well.